Consider this, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bales Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to UNO. I'm pleased to have a man here that is a pretty busy guy, and we've been trying to line up our schedules for a while, and Mike Heavican is with us. He is a longtime public servant in the Omaha metro community. Worked with Sarpy County for years, then the U.S. Attorney's Office. Now he is the U.S. Attorney for Nebraska. We're going to highlight a program today that I think is kind of at the heart of our fears, of what we are involved with, and what we fear the most, and that's guns and violence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we saw what guns and violence can do in northeastern Nebraska just a few weeks ago.
Sure.
But we're talking about, off the top, Project Safe Neighborhoods. And there have been so many projects through the federal government, through the past presidents. What is Project Safe Neighborhoods, and what makes it different, or how does it augment what we've had before?
Well, one thing, Carol, and first of all, I appreciate you having me here today to talk about this program. For one thing, this program originates or emanates from an earlier program back in Richmond, Virginia in the middle 90s. Richmond is a metropolitan area about the size of Omaha, and it had a horrible homicide rate, much higher than Omaha's, and a horrible gun violence rate. And they implemented a program where instead of taking most of the gun cases to the state and local prosecutors, they started taking a big bunch of them to the federal prosecutors, and at the same time they built up a lot of community support, a lot of publicity, letting the perpetrators or the would-be perpetrators know that gun crimes were going to federal court. Everybody was getting serious. They were going to do serious jail time. It was extremely successful, or at least the homicide rate in Richmond went down a great deal. It got a ton of support in the community. That program has been the model for what is being done across the country now. And so when you talk about changes in government, changes in administration, this is really a progression of what was tried earlier.
Now, there are a lot of issues that come to mind. I mean, programs that have nice names and they sound good, but what comes to mind first is that we've been working the past several years, I think, to be fair, of getting better local, state, federal cooperation. It seems to me, in talking to local police, that they don't have those fears as much of the feds. Has that, I know it's an ongoing relationship, but is that not a problem here?
Well, I think you always have some rivalry perhaps on maybe individual cases, but I think particularly here in Nebraska and here in the metro area, we have a long-standing tradition of cooperation between the feds and the locals.
We saw that in Norfolk.
That's right.
Recently.
That is right.
With the attempted bank robbery and the tragic murders.
And the FBI has been out there working extremely hard, and Joe Smith, the local prosecutor, and I have talked on a number of occasions to work out what we think is the best possible way to handle that particular case. But in Omaha, particularly in drug prosecutions, there's been a long history of cooperation between the feds and local people, and these gun programs are really kind of a continuation of that tradition.
The drug was sort of the kingpin in getting these agencies to work together. I think the drugs and drug conspiracies and that really was sort of the catalyst for the beginning of I think a genuine cooperation, at least around here.
It is a genuine cooperation, and we, the feds, like to cement that with a little money once in a while. We have obviously more programs, more grants and so forth sometimes than the state does. So we can help financially, and usually there's a little bit of give and take on that, but if we give a lot of money to state and local officials, we expect some cooperation, and that's part of the process.
A little bit of a hammer.
A little bit of a hammer.
What when we talk about, you talked about the Richmond program and setting up the example that we're going to make an example of these gun cases, or where guns are used in a variety of violent crimes. Give me a few examples without names of the kinds of things where this is making a difference here. And it might not just be in Omaha, it might be
It is really
elsewhere
across
the
state of
state.
Nebraska, and every other federal jurisdiction in the country is doing this. We are taking a whole bunch more felon in possession cases. We are taking illegal aliens with firearms. We're taking drug dealers with firearms. We always took those cases, but we're emphasizing those more. Drug users with firearms, all kinds of situations where there are either federal crimes where there's not a state crime, or there are, with all of our crimes, we have the sentencing guidelines and some mandatory minimums that really make people take notice, and that's the kind of thing we're seeing a whole lot more of.
Now, do you take the whole package? Let's say there are drugs and guns involved. Are the federal guidelines generally more stringent than local penalties, at least around here?
The federal guidelines are normally more stringent, and yes, if we take it, we take the whole package. If it's drugs and guns, we'll take the whole package. If it's a robbery situation where a gun was used, in that kind of a situation, we will talk with the local prosecutors. We do that on all of these cases. If it looks like the locals have a better hammer for some reason, or they want to continue with that case, we continue with it on the local level.
Well, maybe I watch too much Law and Order, where, the feds run the show and play little games. And I know that probably does happen in places, but the reality of it in Nebraska is that even for the number of small communities we have, yes, there is not expertise perhaps in some prosecution because they don't do as many.
Sure.
But on the other hand, there are some really professional law enforcement people.
Absolutely.
I think the quality throughout the state, given the fact that it's harder to get as much constant training, et cetera. But do you sit down and have an honest discussion of which court are we going to play this ball in?
Yes, we do that on individual cases, and we do that as a general policy with the whole safe neighborhoods concept. Generally, we've had great support from local prosecutors, great support from local sheriffs and police officers. Many of them have gone through training so that they understand the program. Lee Polikoff down in Sarpy County has been especially strong on support of this. So the relationship is excellent. I've known Jim Jensen and Gary Lacey for years and years and years.
In Douglas County.
Right, and I've known many of the other county attorneys across the state. So we try to always make those contacts and emphasize that they have first choice on these cases. If they want to keep them, they can. But we are literally here to help, and we will do that if we can.
A little more than a year ago, the president pledge is the wrong word, but he talked about asking for, and I know economies change and budgets change, but more in excess of $500 million for this project. I'm not interested in necessarily how many dollars and cents, but what kinds of monies have come into Nebraska, and where do they specifically target areas that our other tax dollars don't go to?
First of all, Sarpy County has gotten an extra prosecutor. So that's specifically dollars that came in. The U.S. Attorney's Office, in conjunction with the State Crime Commission, will be getting several hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of money for advertising, publicity purposes, and also money to measure how well we do in the program, which I think is really important.
I was just going to say, I think what over the years that I've been in reporting, one of the things that's hardest to find is, and I think all organizations are started doing this a little more, is report cards, measurements, and then that is part of the deal.
Yep, that is part of the deal, and I can tell you this administration is very much into accountability. As everybody knows, George Bush has a master's, I believe, maybe I'm saying this wrong, in business, and we're all doing accountability things, and I think that's a very important component, and because we want to make sure programs work, and so this has that built in as a component.
Let's talk about guns for a minute. I don't want to, make this a political statement because you can tread into you know, and I'm talking to a Republican, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, this
are.
is not an anti-gun statement or, you know, people shouldn't have the right to bear arms, but what are the statistics on do guns continue to flood into our streets? I mean, or is it just the same guns floating around, or I mean,
I'm probably not the right person to talk about guns or numbers of guns, at least coming into the streets.
Just
the
the general
emphasis
talk.
on this program is that the people who misuse the guns are the component that ought to be off the street, as well as, of course, the gun that the person who misused it ought to be off the street.
But guns up the ante.
Guns up the ante for everybody.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, that's the one thing that jumps it to
that-
more danger, more fear.
Sure.
Sure.
And you can see that in Washington, D.C. today, in the metro area in Washington. You've got someone randomly shooting people. So definitely, that's a fear factor for everybody. And
it's something you can't look somebody in the eye. I mean, one-on-one, you may or may not have a fighting chance, but guns give you little or no, depending on.
That's right. And so that's built into the federal guidelines. It's built into some mandatory minimums, and that's why, or one of the reasons why, we think it's so useful to take these cases federally, because that is there. There's very little flexibility for judges in most cases. If we get the conviction, the person is off the street. And
the federal sentencing guidelines, that is one thing, and it's been debated on certain, you know, some of the drug penalties, maybe discriminatory towards, you know, certain populations. But they, at least then, the people who, you know, the taxpayers, you know, don't have to worry about, well, you know, what kind of a judge is it on sentencing?
Absolutely.
The kind of judge is not an issue, or the, you know, the political feelings or the justice feelings or the rehabilitative feelings are not an issue.
Should not be an issue, and of course that's the main reason for the guidelines. Uniformity, not just in Nebraska, but around the United States.
And everybody knows what they're in for.
Everybody knows what they're in for.
You pick up a gun, you carry it into a bank or anywhere else.
And that was a big part of the Richmond program. They advertised, they put it on billboards.
Are we going to do that?
We're going to be doing that, absolutely. You use the gun the wrong way, that's 5 years mandatory minimum. And there's an
no early outs.
There are no early outs. You don't get parole in the federal system. There's a great anecdotal story about a federal prosecutor in Richmond who prosecuted a case, and they had advertised 5 years for gun crime, 5 years for gun crime.
Do not pass go, do not collect $200.
That's right. Well, the total in this particular case came up to considerably more than 5 years, and the defendant said, wait a minute. I thought I was getting 5 years.
Well, we have all the other things to add on, too. That was just the gun.
Yeah. So if you get that message across, it can make a difference, and it has made a difference in particularly difficult metropolitan areas.
Has it made a difference, and maybe you can't answer this because the figures aren't there yet, in younger offenders staying away from guns, everybody staying away from guns? I guess I would think that, or the less hardened criminal, maybe not taking that next step. Do they know yet where they're having an effect?
That's what it's designed to do, because we all know that the persons who are most likely to commit violent crimes are young males between the ages of 18 and probably 35.
Right.
And so
they're also likely to be the victims too.
That is absolutely correct. It's a two-edged sword, and that's where it's designed to go, is to stop those young people from carrying the gun. Just as if they were putting on a coat in the morning, they put on the gun with them. We want to stop that kind of behavior.
If just a few think twice.
Just a few think twice, that's for sure.
Can make an impact.
Sure.
When we talk about crime in general and the kinds of things that the U.S. Attorney's Office handles, it's a variety of things.
Absolutely.
You've got probably some, there's white collar crime. And there is certainly the immigration issues. I mean, you are the law enforcement. I mean, you're the one that would take these cases and have to file on them.
Right.
What's the hoppinest thing? It's a really crappy slang term to use for serious business. But What have you noticed in your year and a half, and then you've been with the U.S.
I've
Attorney's
been
Office
with the U.S. Attorney's Office.
for how many years?
For over 10
Ever?
years.
Over a
10
decade.
years. Time flies.
What, and you know, crime stays the same, and we have some reduction in crime, but the kinds of crimes. But what seems to be moving the most? Obviously, the alien situation is.
And I think that is probably the area of the biggest increase that was not being done by anybody else. Obviously, immigration is a federal issue, and only we prosecute those cases. Now, we have gotten into the drug area, we have gotten into the violent crime area, as Project Safe Neighborhoods is. Those two particular areas have grown greatly, but they previously, and still are, handled by state and local people also. Immigration is not. So immigration has gone up a lot.
You're
for
it.
us. We're it, yes.
And what kind, have you had any additional staff? I mean, we're in Nebraska, we're not talking about, major investigations, but we have increased the number of people that have been investigated, questioned, that you may or may not have, that you may have to deal with.
Oh, absolutely.
What are we talking about? Double, triple?
Staff has not doubled, but we have 26 lawyers now, and we are supplemented by 6 or 7 special United States attorneys that come from the Douglas County Attorney's Office, the Lancaster County Attorney's Office, Hall County, so forth. And the big emphasis there has been on the violent crimes and drug crimes. That's that increase. But we have received increases little by little over the years for things like immigration, for violent crime, and now the other big area, of course, is terrorism. That is priority number 1 for us.
Well, and that's a segue from the alien thing. Not that every terrorist is an alien,
Right.
or an immigrant.
Every alien is a terrorist.
Right, but I mean, we have stepped up our surveillance,
Yes.
and certainly people calling in with tips or concerns, so that you were bound to see on your end an increase in numbers of people that cases you have to at least look at
Sure.
and evaluate.
The big emphasis with terrorism that is something new to the Justice Department and new to prosecutors basically is we don't want to be reactive to a crime that's happened. We want to prevent a crime. We want to prevent a tragedy.
And that's a different mindset in a way. Not that, say,
Absolutely.
Project Safe Neighborhoods isn't in the long term a preventive,
Right.
but a short term preventive is not generally how you're used to thinking, because there's so much, what is the crisis du jour? What is the
Sure.
fire to put out today?
Absolutely. And so the terrorism is a very new thing for us. And of course, it's very grave. We lost 4,000 people in the New York situation, 9/11, but everybody talks about it and everybody knows the next time figures could be catastrophic, just terrible. So that's what makes it so important and so urgent, but also difficult for us, especially in places like Nebraska, where we are probably less likely to run into a terrorism situation than they will in New York or Washington.
But you can't become complacent.
You cannot become complacent.
Because it could.
It could happen here, absolutely.
So, I mean, it's like you worry about all the other things, like I said, the fires that need to be put out, but you can't ever be off your guard. Your edge has to stay up.
Your edge has to stay up. Every federal district in the United States, including Nebraska, has something called the anti-terrorism task forces, which are, again, designed to build bridges to our state and local friends, to get intelligence information down to them, to feed it back up to us, and ultimately to Washington, because the real weapon against terrorism is local citizens watching out for unusual things, reporting those to their local police, and the local police getting back to us.
Okay, true or false? You are not on the front line of that. The law enforcement agencies that would gather the information would primarily be on the front
They're
line.
probably on the front line, but we do have a special mandate to run these anti-terrorism task forces, which don't work on specific cases, but they are there to, as I said, build those bridges to the state and local, and that is something that the Attorney General has commanded us all to do.
Do you
and we're all doing
monitor
it.
with these, do you talk about with these agencies when you have these task force groups? Do you talk about the kinds of information you're getting? Where are you getting it from? I mean, trying to keep at least a handle on,
Absolutely, yes.
what might change from month to month, or month to 2 months later. And
Yes.
and are you seeing it evolve?
It evolves, very definitely evolves. You talked about making sure that you keep the vigilance up, and I've got to say we try very much to do that, but I think that I would have to say in the last year we all tend to get more complacent, and it's just less urgent for us now. So you got my commitment here. We're going to keep that vigilance up, and that's important.
But, you know, I listened to the former FBI director, Louis Freeh, saying that, you know, we couldn't have prevented. He's trying to look with, and, you know, it's sort of like trying to take a drink out of a spewing fire hydrant, I think is the analogy. I'm not quoting it verbatim. Does say the FBI or someone else come to you and say, now, do you handle warrants? Do you handle, you know, are you the one that?
They would typically come to us if they wanted a search warrant, or if they felt that there should be a criminal charge filed.
Or this person held. And
that's right.
So you have to make those decisions. And some of them do you have to make quickly?
Conceivably, yes.
But things have not been crazy here.
Things have not been crazy here. As you would expect, we simply don't have as great a potential, probably
sheer numbers
that they would in New York City, or they would in Washington, or they would in Chicago.
You mentioned before the show that you just went to a conference with the U.S. attorneys from across the country. Usually, these kinds of meetings, you hear what's happening in the bigger cities, and then you can see it drift down to the next tier of cities. What are the kinds of things that people in Omaha, Lincoln, and even the smaller towns, I don't mean to scare people or alarm people, but what are the things that you're being a little more on guard of because they seem to be trickling down? Different kind of trickle-down theory.
Different kind of trickle-down theory. One of the great things at this conference was to see how some of the larger jurisdictions are handling the potential terrorism problems and essentially setting up checklists. Or is this protected? Is that protected? Is somebody handling this potential kind of problem? And that's one of the things that I picked up very much, that we can model some of what we're doing after they're doing, say, in Houston. And it comes back to very basic things. Who is going to protect, for example, a rail yard in North Platte, or who is going to protect a nuclear facility in Auburn, and who's on top of the potential for bioterrorism with agriculture and so forth. And you need to put together that package to make sure that every potential problem is covered some way. Now, we're not the only persons who do that. The governor's office, for example, the state of Nebraska.
Right, emergency management. Yeah.
Sure, and so we anticipate coordination between all of those things.
But then you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel.
Absolutely,
I mean,
sure.
the big cities are taking the lead just because probability maybe push them a little faster.
Absolutely.
And so you can look at those different kinds of things.
Say, that's a great program, we're going to do it here. And those programs may involve the police force in Grand Island. You have a specific job, you need to watch this intersection.
Yeah, because your office or the FBI office in Omaha cannot
that's right.
take all these things. So, and then everyone understands that there's kind of an accountability.
That is the ultimate goal and the reason why we have these task forces.
Drugs. Your predecessor, and you were in that office when that was going on, Tom Monahan, was in when the meth thing started to creep up. Are we? Is this still something? The governor says we need to be really concerned about.
Super priority. Meth is our biggest drug problem. It remains our biggest drug problem. To his credit, Mr. Monahan emphasized that. Emphasized the lab, the mom and pop manufacturing kind of thing. That remains a problem. We're still pushing that as hard as we can. I am, interestingly enough, the head of the Attorney General's Advisory Subcommittee on Drugs, so I get into a lot of that and get a lot of information from around the country, but it is a major problem for Nebraska. It's a major emphasis in our office. because it's a crime that not only drives drug statistics, but in small towns, big towns,
Crime.
bad
All crime.
checks, shoplifting, domestic abuse, you name it.
And escalated
methamphetamine.
more violent crimes.
That's right. You name it, meth is behind a lot of it.
Have we, I remember when, President Reagan and the war on drugs, and I'm not trying to get into the politics of that, but one of the things in the reading that I've done on meth and some personal sort of extended family relationship is that we still have not really educated people on really why meth is very unique and what it does to the brain.
Sure.
We don't even have programs that can really even rehabilitate. We don't even have the method
Sure.
for rehabilitation.
And there are some people who would tell you it's nigh onto impossible to rehabilitate anybody. I'm not going to jump into that camp completely.
No, but it does some specific things to the brain and the pleasure centers that make it hard to
there has to be
revamp your
a
thinking.
long period of time when you're not on meth. There has to be a drying out period to even begin to make a rehabilitative effort. Now, some good things that you're seeing across this state and around the country. State and local courts are emphasizing drugs more, so you see drug courts. You see
Right.
those here in Omaha, Sarpy County,
Out
Lincoln,
in the western Hall County, there's
Sydney,
a bunch of counties
sure, Hall
together.
County, and so forth. Good thing about those is they specifically zero in on the drug problem of an individual. They put people on very strict accountability programs, tethers. They monitor to see if anybody's using drugs and so forth. That's all really good, and if you're going to rehabilitate anybody, that's how you're going to have to do it.
Certainly the first-time offender, which drug courts
are designed to do. Yeah.
We have about 30 seconds.
Sure.
If you could, turn a key, wave a magic wand, what would be the one thing you would like to accomplish in the next poof?
The one thing I would like to accomplish, I would like to make a dent very much in the violent crime area. I'd like to see that dent in Omaha, Nebraska, and Lincoln, Nebraska, around the state. Now, our state isn't as bad off as a lot of states, so it's a little more difficult to measure, but I think that that's important. I hate to get up in the morning, listen to a newscast that says another young child was shot the night before.
Well, we want to keep the good life here.
We want to keep the good life here, and that's what I would like to do most.
Pronto.
Yeah.
Thanks
good.
so much.
Hey, thank you.
Mike Hevigan, U.S. Attorney for the state of Nebraska, and thank you for joining us on Consider This.
Great. Carol,
Excellent.
thanks much.